Welcome to another deep dive, you guys.
Yeah.
This time we're tackling emotional intelligence.
Ooh.
Yeah.
It's a big one.
Everyone's talking about it, but what does it really mean, for us in our daily lives?
Yeah.
So to help us unpack all this, we've got Daniel Goleman's classic emotional intelligence.
Classic.
And then Mark Manson's.
Oh, yeah.
The subtle art of not giving a feck.
Love that one.
So we're going to use these two books to kind of figure out not just what emotional intelligence is, but why it matters.
Yeah.
And how we can actually boost our own EQ.
I love it.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's super fascinating, especially because for so long we really only focused on IQ.
Right.
And thankfully things are changing.
Yeah, it's like we've discovered this whole other dimension of intelligence. So where do we even begin?
Yeah.
I mean, Goleman lays out these 5 components of emotional intelligence.
Okay.
He's got self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills.
That's a lot.
It's a lot, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do we even...
They're all interconnected, though.
Okay.
Think of it as like pieces of a puzzle all fitting together. And what's interesting is how Manson would probably reframe this whole thing as choosing what to give a feck about.
Okay.
So he'd probably say these 5 components all help us to prioritize and figure out where our energy is best spent.
Okay, that makes sense. It's about focusing on what truly matters in our lives.
Exactly.
And speaking of what matters,
Goleman,
in his book, he tells this chilling story about this high school physics teacher, David Polagrudo. And he was stabbed by this straight-A student, Jason H.
Oh, wow.
Just because Jason got a B on a quiz.
What?
Yeah, and this kid, Jason, was like laser-focused on getting into Harvard Medical School.
Oh, my gosh.
And it's just like,
wow.
It's so chilling.
That's a really, really good example of how you can have a high IQ, but without that emotional intelligence, it can have disastrous outcomes.
Yeah, it really underscores that academic brilliance doesn't equal success.
Yeah, exactly.
Or even basic decency in life.
Right.
Right. And Goleman doesn't stop there. He goes on to share this research on these longitudinal studies that were done on these Harvard and Somerville boys.
Yes. The famous studies.
Yes, and they found that emotional intelligence, not IQ, was a much stronger predictor of success.
Yeah, in relationships, careers, overall well-being, everything.
Pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Which is amazing when you think about it.
Yeah, it's almost like the secret ingredient to a fulfilling life.
It is, right?
Yeah.
So, if we're going to go on this journey to boost our emotional intelligence, where do we even begin? Well, Goleman seems to think that self-awareness is the foundation.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are your thoughts?
I mean, being aware of our own emotions is crucial, right?
Yeah.
And Goleman talks about this concept of alexithymia,
Okay.
which is this inability to recognize and articulate your feelings.
Right? I could see how that would be
a problem.
Problematic, right?
Yeah.
And he even tells a story of this college student who calmly put out a dorm fire.
Oh, wow.
Like no running, no panic, just like slowly walked, grabbed the fire extinguisher, and put out the fire because he didn't feel any sense of urgency.
Think about that for a second.
Yeah.
Like not being able to recognize fear in a life or death situation.
It's like you're disconnected from your own internal reality.
Exactly. It really emphasizes how self-awareness is essential to understanding and navigating our world.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got that. And then Manson adds another layer to self-awareness.
Okay.
He says it's not just about recognizing our emotions.
Right.
But also understanding our thoughts and our values.
Oh, interesting.
He even argues that we should constantly be questioning them.
Like, why do we consider something a success or a failure?
Yeah, like, what are we basing our judgments on?
Right. What are those underlying beliefs?
Right.
Challenging assumptions.
And he uses the example of this guy who was feeling resentful because his brother doesn't call him enough.
Oh, yeah.
But by questioning his values, he realizes that frequent contact might not be the only way to define a strong relationship.
Right. Maybe it's about quality over quantity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's about reframing those ingrained beliefs and potentially easing some of our anxieties.
For sure.
So it seems like self-awareness is a much deeper and more complex process than we might initially think.
Totally.
It's not just about knowing what we feel, but understanding why we feel that way.
Yeah.
And whether those feelings are actually serving us.
You've hit the nail on the head. And once we have that self-awareness, then we can start to move into the realm of self-regulation.
Okay.
Mastering those emotions, which is probably a whole other
deep dive.
Deep dive in itself.
Okay, so we'll come back to that.
We'll come back.
In the next part. So we've talked about self-awareness being like the foundation of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
But once we are more aware of our emotions, how do we actually manage them?
Right.
Especially, when they threaten to kind of overwhelm us.
Yeah, totally.
That's where self-regulation comes in, right?
Yeah, self-regulation is all about mastering our emotions.
Okay.
Not letting them master us.
Okay.
And Goleman really dives deep into this, especially with anger.
Okay.
He really gets into like the mechanics of anger.
Well, it feels like everybody struggles with anger at some point.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So how do we...
It's a pretty universal emotion.
Yeah.
A powerful one.
Yeah.
And he breaks down like the physiology of rage.
Okay.
And how like our brains get hijacked by that fight or flight response.
Right.
When we feel threatened.
Yeah.
It's like our amygdala, which is the emotional control center in the brain.
Okay.
It takes over.
Yeah.
And floods our system with all these hormones.
That prepare us to fight or flee.
Right. So it's like rational thinking goes out the window.
Exactly. And that's why...
When we're angry.
Yeah, we say or do things.
And we regret later.
We regret later when we're not thinking clearly.
Okay. So he just doesn't leave us hanging with that information.
Yeah.
Right? He gives us
solutions.
Okay.
Like relaxation techniques.
Okay.
Reappraisal.
Okay.
Looking at the situation in a different way.
Okay.
And he even tells this fascinating story about Buddhist monks who use their emotional strength to calm down soldiers.
Really?
In the middle of a heated battle.
Wow. That's like...
Talk about mastering your emotions.
That's like emotional regulation on another level.
I know, right?
And I guess it also shows how emotions can be contagious.
Oh, totally.
Right. Like if we're around people who are calm, it can help us regulate our own emotional state.
That's a really good point.
Right.
Yeah, our emotional environment definitely plays a role. And this ties in nicely with Manson's do something principle.
Right.
He'd say, we don't have to wait to feel motivated to take action. Sometimes taking action, even if it's small, can actually generate the motivation we need.
I love that idea.
Right.
It's like we can create our own momentum.
Totally. And he even shares a story about overcoming his fear. Of talking to strangers in Russia.
Well, yeah.
He just forced himself to go up and approach people.
Even though he felt terrified?
Even though he felt terrified.
Yeah.
But by taking action, he slowly chipped away at that fear and even started to enjoy those interactions.
So he like retrained his brain.
He retrained his brain.
To not be afraid.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's a great example of how we don't have to be at the mercy of our emotions.
Yeah.
Action can be a powerful antidote to fear.
Okay.
And a catalyst for change.
Okay, so we've got self-awareness and self-regulation.
Yes.
What's the next piece of the puzzle?
Empathy.
Empathy.
The ability to truly understand and share the feelings of others.
And, considering how interconnected we are as humans.
Yeah.
Empathy feels like a superpower.
Couldn't agree more.
Right.
And Goleman dives into the science of empathy, how our brains are actually wired to connect with others on an emotional level.
Wow.
And he even discusses the work of Daniel Stern, who explored attunement.
Attunement.
Yes, in early childhood development.
What is attunement?
So it's basically the ability to understand and respond to an infant's emotional cues.
Okay.
So when a parent is attuned to their child, they create this really secure emotional bond.
Okay.
But when there's misattunement,
it
can have a long-lasting impact on the child's emotional development.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And Goleman even shares this poignant story about these abused toddlers who lacked empathy.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it really is.
But it shows how early trauma can really impact the emotional brain.
Yeah.
And these children's brains basically adapted to that negative environment, leading to emotional detachment as like a survival mechanism.
Right.
It really underscores the importance of creating nurturing and supportive environments for children.
And speaking of environments and relationships, this kind of connects with Manson's discussion on responsibility.
Oh, totally.
He stresses boundaries and the dangers of entitlement.
He argues that we can't expect others to constantly cater to our emotional needs.
Yeah.
It's about finding that balance between supporting each other and maintaining our own emotional well-being.
Finding that balance is key.
Yes.
Okay, so we've covered self-awareness, self-regulation, and empathy.
Mm-hmm.
We've got one more element.
One more.
Of emotional intelligence to explore.
Okay.
And that's social skills.
Yes.
And this feels like where all those
come together.
Come together, right?
Absolutely.
It's like the outward manifestation of all that inner work we've been discussing.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, Goleman even talks about social competence.
Yeah.
And he even observed that popular children tend to be really attuned to those social cues.
They can, like, read a room.
They can read a room
Yeah.
and adapt their behavior accordingly.
Yeah, it's almost like an intuitive skill that they've honed.
It is, and he tells this amazing story about Terry Dobson.
Oh, yeah.
An Aikido master who calmed down a raging drunk.
I've heard of that story.
On a train.
Yeah, have you?
Yeah. It's supposed to be incredible.
It is. He uses this technique called emotional judo.
Wow.
Which is fascinating.
Okay.
He basically met aggression with calmness and empathy.
Wow.
Diffusing the situation.
That's a perfect example of how social skills can be used to navigate challenging situations.
Exactly.
And speaking of challenges,
yes,
I really appreciate how Manson emphasizes the importance of rejection.
I love that about his work, too.
He doesn't shy away from the tough stuff.
Right.
He sees rejection as a path to freedom and growth.
Right.
We can't please everyone, and that's okay. And it's about being authentic and true to ourselves, even when it's hard.
Yeah, he's all about embracing those uncomfortable experiences as opportunities for learning.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've explored these 5 components of emotional intelligence.
We have.
And it's clear that this stuff is crucial for success in all areas of life.
Yeah.
But the big question is, can emotional intelligence actually be learned?
That's the million-dollar question.
Or are we just stuck with whatever we were born with?
Right.
So.
And luckily, both Goleman and Manson seem to think we have reason to be optimistic.
Okay, so.
Buckle up.
We're going to find out.
Because that's exactly what we'll be uncovering in the final part of our deep dive into emotional intelligence.
I can't wait. Okay, so we're back and ready to wrap up our emotional intelligence deep dive.
Yes.
We've uncovered these 5 components. We've talked about why it's so important.
Right.
But can we learn it?
Yeah, that's a question I get a lot.
Right.
People feel like they have these ingrained emotional patterns
that
are just like hardwired into their personality.
Right. Like, are we destined to just be a certain way forever?
Yeah. Can we really change those habits of the heart?
Right. What if you're just naturally prone to anxiety or you have a quick temper?
Right.
Or you just stuck like that?
Well,
I'm sure a lot of our listeners can relate to that.
I think so, too. And Goleman actually addresses this head on when he talks about temperament.
Okay.
That underlying emotional disposition we're largely born with.
Okay.
So our genes definitely play a role, but Goleman doesn't believe that temperament is destiny.
Okay, that's reassuring.
Yeah.
Because we all have those knee-jerk emotional reactions that we wish we could change.
Totally.
So if it's not all about our genes, then what else is going on?
Well, Goleman highlights this fascinating research by Jerome Kagan, who studied these shy and inhibited children. Okay.
And Kagan believed that these kids had an overly sensitive amygdala. That part of the brain that processes fear and other strong emotions.
So it's like their emotional alarm system was set to like a hair trigger sensitivity?
Exactly.
So even small things would make them anxious and withdrawn.
Yeah, so they were kind of wired for shyness from the get-go.
Okay, but that doesn't sound very hopeful for changing those patterns.
But here's the amazing part.
Okay.
Kagan found that a significant number of these children actually overcame their shyness.
Really?
By the time they reached kindergarten.
Wow. So even if you're born with this predisposition, it doesn't mean you're stuck with it forever.
Exactly. And the parenting styles seem to play a role in this.
Oh, interesting.
So mothers who encourage their children to kind of gradually confront their fears, to approach new situations, new people at their own pace, saw their kids become more confident over time.
That makes sense. It's like those repeated experiences of navigating those anxiety-provoking situations help to rewire their brains. Exactly. Their amygdalas learned that not every new encounter was a threat.
Right.
And so they could become more comfortable in social settings.
So it's not just about our genes, it's also about our experiences.
Yes.
Especially early in life.
Early experiences are so important.
That's encouraging to know.
Yeah, and Goleman is a big believer in targeted interventions to help us reshape those ingrained patterns.
Like therapy.
Therapy, yeah, emotional literacy training, those kinds of things. And he really emphasizes the importance of emotional relearning, particularly for those who have experienced trauma, which can have lasting impacts on the brain, altering how we respond emotionally.
Yeah, and I'm remembering that story Goleman tells about that young Cambodian refugee.
Oh, yeah.
whose sons wanted to buy these toy AK-47.
Yes.
And they wanted to reenact this horrific school shooting.
As a game.
As a game.
Wow.
It's just like...
That's a powerful example of how trauma can distort a person's perception of the world.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But does Goleman offer any solutions for dealing with this?
He does. He points to research showing that with the right support, therapy, mindfulness practices, even just strong relationships, these trauma-induced brain changes can actually be reversed.
Wow.
So it's about consciously creating new and healthier emotional responses to triggering situations.
So it's about retraining your brain to react differently.
Yes, and he talks about techniques like exposure therapy, where you gradually and safely confront your fears to desensitize your amygdala and reduce that anxiety.
Okay, so we've got that, and then he also emphasizes the importance of self-soothing techniques.
Yes.
Things like deep breathing meditation or engaging in activities that bring you joy.
Totally.
To regulate those emotions when they feel overwhelming.
Exactly.
So it sounds like even if you've been carrying those heavy emotional burdens for years, it's not too late to start healing.
It's never too late to reshape those patterns.
And this reminds me of Manson's idea about choosing our values.
Oh, that's a great connection.
Right.
He argues that consciously choosing the values we want to live by, things like compassion, honesty, or growth, can actually change how we see and experience the world.
And he shares how for years he was terrified of putting himself out there.
Yeah.
Risking failure or disapproval.
Totally controlled by that fear of rejection.
I think we've all been there.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So how did he deal with that?
Well, he realized that fear was holding him back from living a fulfilling life.
Yeah.
So he made a conscious decision to embrace rejection.
Wow.
To see it as an inevitable part of growth.
Okay.
He challenged his beliefs about success, shifting his focus away from needing that external validation towards finding satisfaction and creating something that he was proud of.
That's a powerful shift in perspective.
It is. And that change in values and how he chose to give effect basically transformed his life.
So he basically changed his relationship with rejection.
Exactly. And I think that's a huge takeaway for all of us. We have the power to choose what matters to us. To reevaluate those limiting beliefs that hold us back. And to cultivate those emotional intelligence skills to help us live more meaningful lives.
I love that.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm feeling a sense of hope and possibility.
Yeah.
It's clear that our emotional wiring is complex, but it's not fixed.
No.
You have the power to reshape those patterns, choose our values, and develop emotional intelligence skills to not just survive, but to truly thrive.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that emotional growth is an ongoing journey.
Yeah.
Not a destination.
Not a destination.
It's about continuously challenging ourselves, practicing those skills, and remembering that even small steps can lead to profound transformations over time.
Well said. So, dear listener, what aspect of emotional intelligence do you feel most drawn to developing further?
Yeah.
And what's one small step you can take today to start down that path?
We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Until next time, keep diving deep.